Doesn't look like the arrows work, looks like a click will work. Here we go. So what's architectural photography? So tonight I just want to go through all the different ways that architectural photography is used. Not all the different ways, but just to take the blinkers off, because I think what's on this page is kind of what people expect architectural photography to be. You know, it's all rather well manicured and finely processed, but it has different reasons for why you produce an image. So when you scan across those, you know, you've got all sorts of things. You've got old buildings, new buildings. You've got things that look like more like presentation drawings than real buildings. And you've got, you know, things like kitchens and the harbour bridge, and all those things fall into the realm of what architectural photography is. So I've got a little bit of a brief little sort of description about what they might be. So an architectural photograph can be a building, can be the inside or outside of a building, it can be a bridge or any other structure. And even the wider view of the city, that's as a cityscape, that's an architectural photograph. And you know, the object that you're photographing, it can be under construction. You know, I used to take lots of shots of buildings under construction. It can be a completed building, or it can be a building that's sort of falling down and in disrepair, giving you all those sorts of fantastic sort of character type shots, those sort of grunge, you know, urban sorts of shots, lots of disrepaired buildings there. And sometimes, like those first images, they can be presented as, you know, an abstract pattern, a total abstraction of what reality might be. Or it might be, you know, taking a series of photos for the National Trust to do a historical record for a building. So you've got everything in between. They can be interpretive. They can be, you've got to think also about why they're being made. You know, they're being, you know, they always have a purpose. Often it's for the building owner. They want to have a brochure, or they want to have a, you know, they've got some advertising document they want to produce for a building. Or it might just be for the architect's own website, you know, or just to promote the architect. Some buildings are works of art, you know, something like the Opera House has become a cultural symbol for Sydney. And other buildings which end up in architectural photos are pretty utilitarian and quite banal. So I think if any of you know Christian Fletcher's shots, he's trying to do the banal sort of architectural shots at the moment with those washed out sort of Californian looking photos. So Christian's ones, he quite happily admits that he's trying to catch the banal in the urban context. But at the end of the day, the more that a photographer can understand and is informed about the subject that he or she is going to photograph, then the stronger the resulting image is going to be. So in some ways, it's a bit like taking a landscape. All right. So if you are heading off to, you know, take a photo of Kirkafell in Iceland, you do all your homework, you look at all the pictures other people have taken, you spend some time at Kirkafell, you wander around, you have a look for the best angle. You know, you might go there in the morning, you might go there in the afternoon. It's exactly the same with the building. So because the building is going to be displayed in different contexts, depending on what the weather is like or where you view it from, the more homework you do, and you know, if you learn a bit more about the architect and the process of putting the building together, then you're going to be able to interpret the work in a better way. So this is an area where lots of architectural photographs get used. Places like Vogue Living or Bell Magazine or House and Garden or Architectural Digest, all those sorts of things. And they have a purpose, and usually it is to sell something. All right, so in these images, the things in the images aren't there by accident. The chairs will be put in there by the person who makes the chairs, and they'll be on page 64 in the trade reference section, so you know where to buy the chairs. You know, the lights will be cross-referenced, so you know where you can buy the lights. So they've all got, it's an orchestrated branding process. And if you've ever been along to one of these photo shoots, there's probably about 6 people standing behind the photographer, all looking through the image that he's about to take, making sure everything's in the right place and all the cushions are fluffed properly and there's no one walking past the back window or those sorts of things. So it's about product placement, about selling a dream. And another good distinction to think about is that these images are object driven. All right, so the things that are in the images are things and they're objects that we're to see. Whereas often if you're photographing a building, often it's the space that is of more interest, not the object. So you approach it differently. So you're trying to capture the feeling of a space, or you're trying to capture the effect of light falling through a vast cavernous space or a small place. So the way you take the photograph, you approach it differently. All right, one's commercially object driven, the other one is more about space and place. One's not better than the other, it's just that they're different. And there's another spot, marketing brochures. So lots of architects get work for architectural images, taking all the shots. I had someone say to me about McGrath that there's no such thing as a grey sky day at McGrath, all right, because every single image that goes into a brochure in a McGrath magazine has had the sky replacement put in, and it's always blue or coloured. So it's there's no such thing as an unprocessed image in even in this one. I think you can tell that looks like the sky's been replaced on that right-hand image, and try to get a bit more colour, or get a little bit, make it a bit more attractive for the sales brochure. And there again, they have an object. So the taking of the photo has a reason. There's a client involved. There's a brief being given. There's an expectation. So a different type of process in the Vogue Living or the Bell magazine type production to what you or I might do as we're taking images for our own benefit. So I've put this one in as a thought provoker because this won the 2021 American Institute of Architects Los Angeles Architectural Photography Awards. It was judged the best image. All right, and I've put down the bottom there, you can read it in your own time, the jury notes. All right, so it says, the image powerfully dramatizes the uneven development between financial accumulation in global urban centers and the specificities of local sites. This portrait of brick, so I dropped that in for you. It's Brazil, Russia, India, and China. They're grouped together as developing nations. So the portrait of brick landscape squarely questions the economic adage that the rising tide lifts all boats. The background, midground, and foreground elements solemnly read like a stacked bar chart. Multinational development on the top, bearing down on dry local economy, leaving the individual at the bottom with nothing in his hands and hiding his face. All right, so that's an architectural photograph, but it's got social commentary. It's got an agenda. It's got all sorts of issues that are read into the image, but it's an architectural photograph. Here's another one. All right. So the reason I put this one in is that because architecture is an art, it rarely stands alone. All right. It's included in the arts. So it gets lumbered in with painting, with sculpture, with all the other arts. And lots of ideas are borrowed between, just like there's an art movement in art, in like the Impressionist, or a movement in any particular art where certain ideas get refined and the like. The same happens in architecture, right? So there's very few buildings that just pop out of nowhere. They've usually got a heritage, they've got a history of thinking, they've got the body of the work of the architect behind, and they end up being developments of an idea, or they're seen in context. All right, so in this one, this is the Louvre building in Abu Dhabi. All right, so if you ever get a chance, fantastic building to go into. This sort of woven roof that runs across it all is about, I'm not sure how many, there might be about 10 layers of metal in it, and you can actually see the sky through it. So it's got buildings underneath it which are self-contained, little square boxes. and this overarching sort of domey thing runs over the top of it. But the jury then puts this in context because it says a lacy scrim dominates the upper register of the image, contrasting the stark white walls below, where 4 women clothed in black concentrate the viewer's attention, standing amid dappled light from the ceiling above. The porous elevation of the Jean Nouvel's Arab Institute in Paris finds Baroque expression as a massive dome ceiling in Abu Dhabi, only to be transformed back into an elevation by this exquisite photograph. All right, so what I've done is I've got those 2 pictures on the left, Jean Nouvel's Arab Institute in Paris. So he's got a building where he's interpreted the sort of the Islamic sort of art pattern on the external facade. He's got a glass box with this intricate pattern in behind it. And inside the building, it casts all these lovely ornate sort of very tailored patterns across the interior of the building. So then the judge obviously has an understanding of contemporary architecture, can see where it sits, and he can see a reference or a development of the idea of Jean Nouvel's Arab Institute with what's happened in the Louvre. All right, so in assessing the architectural image, it's not just, it's a nice picture, looks great, well composed. He's actually got all this other baggage in behind there, which he's using to assess the image. And because of the nature of architecture as an art, that often runs, and we'll see another version of that after this one. But what's kind of interesting in the image on the right is the use of the lens and what he's done with it. And looking at what the jury has said, it is quite interesting, isn't it? Because that dome, which is just arching over the whole building, in the image, because the lens that has been used, it's been flattened up and has just become pattern on the top. All right, so the image is kind of broken into 2 bits: plain white walls with a sort of Mondrian type pattern on the plain white walls. The top half is, because of the lens that's been used, there's no sense of 3 dimension in the roof, and it's just been turned into an elevation, a flat elevation for the roof. And then on that sort of canvas, he's then put the 4 black ladies, or the 4 black dressed ladies. So it's an interesting, so this one's quite interesting in how it's transformed what is quite a vast 3-dimensional space, and because of the lens selection, it's flattened it right down. So that is as a approach to documenting a building is valid and gives you some interesting effects if you try to compress space, because we know how long lenses compress things; they'll bring them all together. So there again, you can do a similar sort of effect visually for an architectural shot. So this is another one where, there again, architecture being one of the arts. So down on the right-hand corner, there's an artist around, early 1900s, this Malevich, and he was kind of around the same era as Mondrian, playing around with the shapes, colours, patterns, and then using that to structure a painting. All right, so this judge, when he's come along and looked at this photo, has seen some similarity between the way the guys composed the photo and a Malevich painting. All right, so he says, compositionally striking, the image gets its charge from the individual cleaning of Turrell's sky space. There's one of those down in Mona, down in Tassie. So if you've never seen one, interesting things on their own. Using photography to flatten the space often comes at the expense of architectural intent or understanding, but this playful Malevich-esque composition was too much fun to pass up. Right? So when you go into an architectural image competition, you usually find that the judges are pretty educated, all right, because they've got, or you run the risk if you were to put this image in, say, a local competition, maybe the Australian Photography magazine, and the judge wasn't familiar with Malevich's work or the heritage of that style of painting, then you wouldn't even get a Guernsey, all right, because they just don't understand the image. So you're kind of reliant upon just how much reading and how eloquent the judge is and how experienced the judge is, whether they pick up some of the ideas. But I think what I'm trying to get through in these last couple of pictures is that you can start with just a picture of a building, but you can give it all this extra layering in the image to make it more than just a picture of a building. All right, so I was reading the other day, Robert Adams, he's a landscape photographer from the US, and he was writing about landscape photography. And he said every good landscape photo needs geography, biography, or autobiography, and metaphor. All right? And he says if you got one of each, then it's a bit of a limp old picture. But if you've got all three, then it starts to sing, all right? Because first of all, the geography part, same as this, it's a picture of Turrell sky space. So it's a place, has geography. The autobiography then comes about as in what it tells something about the photographer. All right, so because the photographer has taken this picture like this, then we know a little bit about him. We know that he knows about painting. We know he knows about a few different other things. So we're finding out a little bit about the photographer. And the last one then is metaphor. All right, so metaphor will then give meaning to a picture, and it will give simile is one thing, metaphor is another. It looks like something, that's a simile, or if it, in this instance, we're sort of saying Turrell sky space is a Malevich painting. That's the metaphor, all right? So that we're now looking at an image, an architectural image, in a totally different way. We've got all this interest, we've got all this extra layering, and we're engaging with the image at a much deeper level, all right? So if you're talking about, everybody wants their photograph to be looked at, and everyone wants their photograph to be appreciated. And the first thing most photographers have to learn is that no one's really interested in your photo except you and your mum. All right. Apart from that, there's not too many other people who are interested. And then there's a battle for getting inside someone else's mind to give them something that they want to engage with. All right. So we're always trying to find ways to make our images more interesting, always trying to find ways to see things differently, and always trying to find interest to put in an image so that a judge or our fellow photographers can get more out of it and get more engaged with it. But also for us, as we get better at photography, we want to start doing more things with our images. So metaphor, or these sorts of ways that these guys are doing things with their images, gives you that leg up where you can provide a more interesting image and more engagement for those who are looking at your image. There's another one which is quite good. The chat by the Jew is a bit of a carry-on, but the point is well made. All right, so in this case, we've got metaphor. This is metaphor, right? We're saying that the underside of an overpass is a cathedral. All right, that's the metaphor. And the judge gets it, and he says, the vertical grandeur of the interstitial, that's in between space of highway infrastructure captured in an image, populated by a stray dog, a pair of people communicating in the depth of the picture, and lit by the rising sun. The same elements that you might use, and I've put a cathedral shot on the left, similar sorts of elements you might use to put it together. And then within this infrastructure, the two congregants, being the two guys down the back near the fence, they've got the backlit altar, and one of the participants, being the dog, is sniffing around the pews. All right, and the omnipresent eye in this case isn't God, but it's the camera. Right, so the image has been laid up and well seen, hasn't it? So this guy's been wandering down, looking through a derelict part of town, and it's just come to him, and he's seen that, well, this thing is just like the picture on the left. It's just that It's been created in a different way. It's got different reasons. So the metaphor part really adds interest to the picture. The other area which is becoming more common is the interaction of architectural images with Instagram. All right, so you're not only just seeing one architectural image on its own, you're seeing them in context, and it's not only the virtue of one image, but it's how it works with other images, and to create pattern, to create interest, to create all the things that you need to do. So in some ways, a Instagram page is a bit like a portfolio, because it's telling you something. It's a bit like that thing about geography, biography, and metaphor. The biography part in this instance is the architectural firm, and what you see by the 9 photos is you get a bit of an idea about what the architectural firm is about, what they're like, the sorts of things, how they do things. So you're getting biography out of the photos. You're getting geography because you can see where they do most of their buildings. It seems to be out in the country, out in the desert in Nevada or somewhere. And then the metaphor part, then you've got to work at. But you can see where the interest then comes, because first of all, you've got the design of the building. You've then got a very structured way that they're looking at those designs, very sort of, like a graphic artist might just look at patterns. And then you're looking at how you're grouping those images together. So this one, so there's now a competition. So that same competition now has a competition for the best Instagram page. All right. So not only are individual images judged, or individual images with social content and brick landscapes being assessed, but also how you put architectural images together to display or convey the intent or the underlying design philosophies of a design firm. Right, so you can read what the judges have said on the side. They're after good content, but what immediately stood out is the cohesive branding. So we're almost back to the Vogue magazine approach, aren't we? So it's almost about product, all right? Because the architectural image has become a product because it's the thing that sells the architect's services. And if you've got a good product, then someone's more likely to come and ring you up because they like the look of your product. So this one is not interested so much in space. It's not interested in character or social content. It's a design exercise. It's about how you're going to sell and flog your architectural business to a potential client. So I put this one in to, again, promote discussion, but this is, it's kind of helpful to look, so depending on the sorts of architectural images you want to take, if you want to get into, they're all valid. We're not saying one's right, one's wrong, or one's better, but they're just different, all right? But the ones that interest me the most are the ones where you try to get inside the brain of or the mind of the architect, try to understand what he was trying to do, try to understand the building that he's created, and then come up with some images that understand that, and then display and show that to somebody else. All right? So in a lot of ways, it's just the same way that you would approach a landscape. It's the same way that you would approach a portrait, in that what you're trying to do is get some understanding of what you're going to be taking a photograph of. And then once you've got an understanding of that, be able to convey the nuances that you've been able to get out of that understanding. All right, so if I was to say, let's go and take a picture of the Opera House, then what I've done here is I've just given you 5 pictures of the Opera House. And I then would say to you, well, which one says Opera House the most? All right, which one conveys the Opera House the best? And if none of them do, or if I need to take more than one, then it might be a bit like the same approach that Picasso took to his portrait painting. And I'm not sure if any of you know, but those weird sort of contorted pictures that Picasso painted, it was like when I'm sitting talking with you, I see your face moves and you're you're not static. All right. And what Picasso did in those weird, wonderful pictures is he showed the person straight on, he showed them side on to try to be more as a realistic interpretation of what it's like talking to that person. All right. So he's not just doing this weird abstraction, he's trying to convey in some ways time in what is a thing that has no time, right? Because a painting has no time, he's trying to capture time in that. And someone else who does tried that is David Hockney. So if you're interested in paintings, go and have a look at some of David Hockney's images. And there again, what he's trying to do is get time into something that doesn't have time. So he's trying to get that extra dimension into a fixed work. And it's kind of the same with something as complex as, say, the Opera House. How can I convey the whole of the Opera House in one photo? I can't get the sense of walking through the spaces of those tightly cropped areas, wandering around the various interiors of the building. One little trick you can do, which a lot of architects do, is they take the picture of the Opera House at dusk. All right, so you can see the outside of the building, and because the lights are on, you get more of a sense of the inside. So that way you can see the outside and the inside at once. All right, so dusk is a fantastic time to take a photo, because even the one in the nighttime shop in the middle down the bottom, with all the lights and everything, with the forecourt looking out to the Harbour Bridge, you get that sense there where you get a feeling of the inside of the building, as well as the shells of the building. So you're getting more of a sense of the inside and the outside together. So all I'm saying here is that if you're going to, rather than just sort of wandering through the city and taking, fantastic little abstracts walking down the street, that's one way of doing architectural photography. The other way is to actually engage with a building, learn a bit about it, go and see it in all sorts of weather conditions, and then put a bit of a story together to try to express the soul of the building, if you like, what the building's all about, what makes it special, why would you bother photographing it above another building, getting to sort of understand the character of it, just like you would a portrait. So we've just had the Archibald, and you've got all those lovely portraits of people, and the ones that most engage you as a portrait are the ones where you can feel like you know the person that's sitting in front of you. And the same with a good architectural photo. A good architectural photo shows you something that you may not have seen, but shows you something about the sitter. And in this case, it's the building, because it's not going anywhere. And you're discovering something about the building in front of you, or the guy who put it together, or some story about it. So as soon as it has story, it has more interest to somebody. So if you're trying to engage and involve a viewer in your image, then the more you can engage them, the more they're going to be interested. Yep. Is all this making sense, or is it all too esoteric?
We're all on mute. So, no, it's all
So just to sort of sum all of that to make up to make a little bit of sense about architectural photography, in that the World Architecture Festival, they broke it into 6 categories, all right, to try to make sense of all the images. There was exteriors, interiors, sense of place. All right, so the Opera House is a good one for sense of place. So somewhere that has a unique location, unique setting, and when you are there, you can't be anywhere else. All right, so that the effect it has on you, or the environment that it creates, is quite unique. So how you capture that, that's the challenge. There's buildings in use. There's a portfolio. So obviously you can't capture everything in one shot. And then there's the Instagram feed. So 6 different ways of looking at architectural photography.
So is that Instagram feed, that's your portfolio sort of approach, although that's the one above it, isn't it?
Well, that's right. So a portfolio, I think, would be a more stylized group of images, because in an Instagram feed, I think they're the different purposes. All right. So it's a bit like product. All right. So the Instagram feed is product, and you've got the images, you got them there for a reason because you want clicks, or you want a potential client to look at it and say, yeah, got to employ these guys, look at this, all right? So an Instagram feed has one purpose, whereas a portfolio might be different, all right? It may not, it'll have a different purpose. So in a portfolio, you can then come to grips with something like all the interiors of the opera house. So be able to have shots of around the theatres themselves, the context of the shells sitting on this big sort of platform that like a big serving plate to serve up the shells. So you can put together a story in a portfolio, where an Instagram, I think, is a bit more product driven.
Yeah. Yep, that makes sense.
All right, so equipments and musings. All right, so I've just thrown a whole lot of things in here, but so the summary's on the left-hand side. And if you want all the palaver, it's on the right-hand side. All right, so if we quickly go through that. So I reckon the great thing about architectural photography is that your subject stays still. All right, so whether you can then do the moving. All right, so it's not going to be going anywhere. So you got plenty of time to take the shot. It's not going to. So the things that move are the people that go around it, or the clouds, or the lighting, or those sorts of things. But you got lots of control over your subject. And if you turn up at 10 a.m. every morning, allowing for daylight saving, you'll get the same light conditions. You don't have to go and get your studio lights out. You don't have to do all that. So you got a great ability with most exterior architectural photography do that. If you want to get into the Vogue magazine, Bell magazine type shots, then you do have to. There you got the full studio. Everything's got to be set up. Everything's zhuzhed to within inches of its life, so that everything's absolutely perfect for the shot, because it's got a different reason. So because of the nature of architectural photography, usually you're going to be, as with any good photographs, it's the light. All right, the light tells the story. And the most interest, I think, for an architectural photograph is just watching the light render and fall on the subject, and the different ways that you can capture that light and the different effects that the light's going to have. All right, because of that, you're going to need a tripod. All right, so equipment-wise, got to have a tripod, because you're going to have times where you've got to have a long exposure. You're going to have times where the light's not real good, and you've also got to have the ability to take your time. All right, and if you put your camera on a tripod, then you can do all your compositional work. You can fine tune. You can do everything really quite well on a tripod. But what you might do is, when you're getting to know the subject, you might actually wander around the building with your camera without a tripod, just exploring different angles, exploring different ways of capturing it. But when you take that final shot, you're going to need a tripod to get it exactly right. Yeah. And not everywhere you go, you're going to be able to use a tripod. All right. So I went and took some shots in the interior of Elizabeth Bay House, one of the National Trusted buildings down there over Elizabeth Bay. And whilst they let you take photos in there, they won't let you take a tripod in. All right. So you've got to do everything handheld. Or for a special deal, you can rent out the Elizabeth Bay House for an hour or two and get your camera club down there, and they'll then let you use your tripods. But if it's generally open to the public, they won't let you use one. The other place is somewhere like Barangaroo. If you turn up with a tripod, they'll think you're a professional photographer and they'll move you on. If you turn up handheld with your iPhone or with a smaller camera, you can get away with it. But security, they've got cameras everywhere, and they are quite, I think if anyone's tried it, most of the interesting buildings around town have security who move anybody on who tries to set up a tripod and take a proper shot, because essentially they have the right over the plaza. If it's attached to the building and it's their space, you can take pictures from the public area, like where the boundary is, but you can't go and set your tripod up on their property to take the shot. So there's some issues about tripods, which you need to think about. As I mentioned, the blue hour is fantastic because you can get the outside and the inside together. So you're kind of getting bang for your buck because you're getting two lots. And in the case of the Opera House, it's great because if I take architect role for a minute, Utzon's idea was to have these shells independent of the theatres, so that you can actually see through and see the space between the shells and the theatres, so that it was like a violin case. All right, so the shell was like a violin case. You open the violin case, and inside is this magnificently crafted thing, and the magnificently crafted thing is the theatre, but you could see the shell separately. That didn't quite come out in the final draft, but that was his intent. All right, so by taking a shot where the lights are on the inside and you can see the shells on the outside, you then have the ability to capture that idea. All right, because you're going to be able to, depending where you locate yourself, you're going to be able to see through, you're going to see over the theatre, you're going to see the difference between the shell and the inside, and you capture the idea. All right, but if you didn't know that Utzon had the idea that the two things were separate and that was the idea, then you wouldn't be trying to capture it. But having done the homework, you can then go along and, with the idea of the architect, try to capture that idea and see how well it works. So that's a little bit of a, I take my architect's hat off now. So choosing the time of the day. So often you've got to visit, same with landscape, as in landscape photography, you go and see the place when it's foggy, where it's sunny, in the morning, at the night, you know, in the afternoon, and you just find just the right condition to take the picture of the image of the building. If you got, you know, some of those quite brutalist buildings with the really deep recesses and the dark shadows, middle of the day is fantastic because you got a really black shadow and you don't want the soft light because you don't get that sense of brutalism that they've got. So it's, you know, it's just choosing the light that suits the subject. There's got lots of glass, lots of reflections are great. You then come to the choice of what you're going to do with verticals and horizontals and whether you want to plumb them up and be a real architectural photographer or not. So traditionally, you would go and buy yourself a tilt shift lens. And what that enables you to do, I think I've got I didn't put a picture in, but it enables you to get rid of the convergence that a tilted lens gives you, and you can keep the verticals vertical. And doing that, just I've got some pictures in a minute that show you that, but it really gives strength to the image if the verticals stay vertical. These days, you can do most of it in perspective warp in Photoshop, but the only problem is you need to leave lots of margin around what you're going to perspective warp, because if you've ever tried it, you lose a lot of the image around the edges when you do perspective warp. Whereas if you do it with a tilt shift lens, it's all there when you take the shot and you know exactly what the composition is going to be. So they're expensive things, tilt shift lenses. So my 19mm tilt shift, fantastic lens. It's also fantastic for taking landscapes because you can actually tilt the lens around and you can then create perfect panoramas when you're stitching them together because everything overlays. So good landscape lens as well. But my Nikon 19mm tilt shift cost me more than $4,000. All right, there's a cheaper version. Laowa do something similar. They got a little tilt shift adapter, and I think you can get that for about $800 or $900. But tilt shift is kind of interesting because it does open up a lot of interest in the imaging. Zoom lens to bring in detail shots. If you're after a different shot, think of a drone. All right, because you can get an aerial view or you can get a picture of a building halfway up. So, you know, if you've got a 12-story building, instead of looking up at the thing, you can get to level 6 and have it up and down. So you get a different sort of view. So drones are becoming more popular for those sorts of things because as in all photography, you're trying to get something different, show your client something different, capture someone's interest by viewing something differently. And drones are great at giving you a different point of view. Looking at the different weather conditions, camera settings. So camera settings, the thing that'll drive you nuts when you're doing interior shots is that the windows are always burnt out because you can't, you know, the dynamic range is too great. So to do it properly, you've really got to, you know, do your exposure blending. So you've got to take a shot for the window, take a shot for the inside, and then blend the window back into the image so you can actually see out the window. So all those little things that just add detail to the image, you've got to think about when you're putting those together. But you know, architectural photography, perfect for displaying the effect of light. So down the left there is what I use. So I've got a few different cameras, but the Nikon D810 is fantastic. I'll show you, I've got some images coming up of my own things. And when I do my street walks, I just take a little Sony RX100, just the little point and shoot that Sony's got, gives you a 24 megapixel image. But often that's all you need for your architectural image. You don't have to go to great expense to have lots of gear, and you'll be quite interested in a couple of the images that I show you, which were taken with the Sony RX100. What's it? I think you buy one for about $1,400, RX100. The Laowa lenses are fantastic. They've got, if you keep a Laowa lens perfectly level with the ground, or with the horizon, when you set it up on the tripod, all the verticals stay vertical. It's quite fantastic. So even in the 12mm lens, verticals are vertical. So you don't have to go to the problem of or the issue of a tilt shift lens. If you're trying to get lots of area in your picture, then the 12mm gives you lots of real estate, but it also gives you all the verticals. I've also got the traditional Nikon 14-24, which is a great interior lens as well, but the 12 just outdoes it all the time. The 70-200 to bring in all those details. And as I say, if you especially in those images that you would have seen for the Bell magazine interiors, they're all going to be focus stacked. All right, because anything that's close to the camera, it's got to be in focus. Anything in the middle has got to be in focus, and the distance has all got to be in focus. So when you got product, everything's got to be in focus. So the only way to really do that, unless you've got a large format camera with an enormous depth of field, is to do the focus stacking. So some techniques that make some of the photography a bit of fun. And some things that you got to think about. So the picture on the right is the new Oculus building by Santiago Calatrava in New York, where the World Trade Center used to stand. And Calatrava is a structural engineer, but the stuff he does, he's become an honorary architect just because it's so interesting, and a bit like Luigi Nervi, who was another one around in the 60s. They just produce some really interesting buildings, but exposing all the structure. So one of the things that either drives you to despair or you got to work with is what you do with people in the picture, and also what you do with clouds in the picture. All right. So the picture on the right, you know, because it's always busy, it's a place. It's a place of transience. People move through the building to go and do things. You can choose what you're going to do with the people. All right, you can either freeze them like he's done in the picture, or you can treat them like that picture in the middle where you actually give them a bit of motion blur. All right, so they then take on a different sort of character. You know, and I think that if the photographer had used a technique like the images in the middle, that would have kind of enhanced the nature of the story. It would enhance the story of people moving, the transient nature, the solidity of the building, you know, all those sorts of things. So you can actually use people to your benefit, depending on the story that you want to tell. And in this instance, because it's a transport type building, having people moving through it and not freezing them gives it another sense of interest to the story, which I think the guy who's taking the picture on the right's kind of missed out on. But the other thing you'll see in the picture is see how all the vertical lines are vertical. So he's used his tilt shift lens there, and he's lined everything up, and you can see that really gives some strength to those buildings in the background without them keystoning or sort of having that divergent line that you get with a normal lens that's tilted up. And then the other thing is what you do with clouds, because clouds again are a compositional tool. And if you, there again, use your tripod, do your long exposure, then the clouds can become an interesting design element. All right, so you can see with that picture on the bottom left how if the clouds weren't blurred, the image would be quite different. And there again, in the one on the right with the oculus, imagine if the clouds are blurred and the people were blurred, just the impact that would give on the image. It would then give more emphasis, I think, to the oculus, the building that he's trying to photograph. So, you know, as with every photograph, what we're trying to do is isolate the subject, you know, because it's the center of the story. So if I can make the building stand out with using different tricks like blurring the people or blurring the clouds, then why not use that? Because it also adds interest to the picture as well as adding interest to the story. Another technique. So these are two old images on the top right of, but you can see they're done with a tilt shift lens, and you can see just how strong and impactful a skyscraper is if the lines don't diverge away from you with perspective, and they just sit there, and you know they really take a you know, much stronger, much more dominant, and it really gives more of a sense of what the building's like with the keeping all the verticals vertical. So rather than rather things recessing and running away from you, you keep them strong because that's the nature of a building. It's not trying to run away from you. So there again, the picture on the left in the middle, that's kind of good because he's used the long exposure and he's got that sense of people being transient, but the buildings being firm and they're not going anywhere. So that sort of adds to the story, I think. So popular at the moment, pictures like down on the bottom left, you know, those long exposure, very sort of fine art, black and white type images. All right. And if you've ever wondered how you do them, then the godmother of those images is Julia Anna Gospodaru. And she was the first to try them out. And then one of her students is Joel. And the two of them got together and they've written this book, and they show you all about how to do those sorts of images, how to take the pictures, how to process the images, how to light the images. And so if you want to get on board and do some of those sort of fine art black and white shots, then that's the place you go. Julie is going to show you all about how to do that. You buy her book. I think it's $80 or something, and it's nice and thick. So, but she's the one who is sort of the grandmother of those fine black and white images for techniques. I've put this one in. These are the some of the semi-finalists out of the AIPP Silver Linings Awards. And one of the comments people often say about the AIPP is that it's got a certain style about it. And I think you can see by these images that they have a certain style about them. So AIPP's got a style about, for those who don't know, AIPP is the Australian, the professional photographers body, the Australian Institute of Professional Photographers, I think it is. So all the up and comers, all the established guys are members of this. I think Tony Hewitt, Peter Eastway, Ignacio Palacios, Adam Williams, all those guys belong to the AIPP because that's the professional body, and that's the one where they get to hang out together. And you know, just like the Institute of Architects is for the architects, and there's an Institute of Surveyors for surveyors, there's an Institute of Professional Photographers, and that's where they all hang out. But what's interesting is that these are the images that got to the semi-finals, all right? And they've all got a style about them. And I think you'll, so Graham Gordon's is that black and white one. Some of you know Graham. And he actually, I think, did Joel's course, all right? So he's gone off, learnt from Joel how to process his black and white images. And as you can see, very similar style, processed in a very similar way, and it tells a certain type of story. But I think you'll agree with all these images, the buildings end up being more like design elements, and they end up being almost like two-dimensional graphics. All right, so you're playing with color, with pattern, with composition, but they're treated a bit like two-dimensional exercises, like a good graphic designer might do. All right, so if your intent is to try and capture the character of the building or the intent of the architect, you may not necessarily choose to document a building the way that these guys have in this selection, all right? Because I don't think that you really get a sense of the subject. They're interesting exercises. They're well composed, interesting colors, you know, good graphic works of art. But that's one way of doing it, all right? There's the way that we've also seen about putting social context in it. So if you put the guy at Mumbai standing by his rubbish by the edge of the lake next to one of these, then they got a totally different way that they engage the viewer. They got a totally different intent, but they're both architectural images, right? They're both architectural photographs, but they have different intent, different outcomes, and depending on what you want out of the image depends how you will approach it. So some people are quite more than happy just to have a graphic exercise and play with shapes and patterns. That's quite a valid way of approaching it. But if you're the sort of person who really wants to grapple with something else, then I think what I've been able to show you tonight is that there's other ways of engaging in architectural photography if you just don't want to do the standard AIP type graphic design approach to buildings, because there's other ways of doing it, right? We're not saying one's better than the other. It's just that there's different ways of doing it, different styles, different outcomes, different intents, and also different engagement that you'll get from people who look at it. And also professionally, as you as a photographer putting these images together, you'll have a different experience from going through and working on the image and working on maybe a group of images and coming out with something at the end and showing it to someone. You'll be showing it to them on with a different agenda or a different intent. So these are a couple of mine. So the one on the right was the one that got to the Silver Linings Awards this year. And the one on the left just got selected by the APS to go in the bundle of Australian photos that go off to compete in the Three Nations Cup. I think it's New Zealand, Canada, and someone else this year. I wasn't particularly interested, so I didn't take much notice. But the image on the right was taken with my Sony RX100, all right? So I've got an image that I've ended up with being able to present to a body of professional photographers and get into the top 10. And I've taken it with a point and shoot and a 24 megapixel sensor, all right? So so the story out of that is that if you want to produce a worthwhile architectural image and you want to be able to compete it with the best, you don't have to spend thousands on your equipment. It comes down to your idea, your vision, your processing, and the actual equipment you use doesn't have to be too fancy. All right? So with this image, just to give you a little bit of an idea, I've actually, the right-hand part of the building I've mirrored, all right? So I've actually flipped the building. It doesn't actually look exactly like that because you can't get to a spot where you can actually take a clear shot of it. It's down the bottom of George Street. I think it's number 1. I think it's number 1, George Street. And then I have dropped the sky on, all right? So I took that sky walking up to Barrenjoey Lighthouse for a sunset during COVID. And it was a perfectly graded sky, blue to orange. And I took that as one of my stock skies, and I've applied that. I've color graded the rest of the image. So I've done quite a bit of work in Photoshop on it, but I've come up with an AIP type image using an RX100 and a bit of Photoshop. The one on the left was a fantastic morning, just near the end of summer. It was still a bit of smoke haze you can see on the harbour. And I didn't realise until I went down there this morning that the ferries don't start till 6 o'clock. All right. So if you go down there before 6 o'clock, the harbour is like a mill pond around Circular Quay because there's no boat movement. So it was everything just lined up. It was perfect. Got the great reflection. I've enhanced the reflection, so it wasn't quite as good as that. But the sky is straight out of camera and the silhouette is straight out of camera. And I've had to do very little apart from do a little bit of enhancement on the reflection. So what's kind of interesting about these two images is the color palette. All right, and it seems to be that people respond really well to a range that goes from warm to cool. All right, so in an image, if you're putting an image together, if it's all blue or all yellow, you get more response is if you color grade between the blue and the orange. It seems to balance visually for people, right? Because these images are quite different in black and white. I probably should have given a version in black and white so you can see the difference. But the thing that makes these images what they are, I think, is the color. So when you're putting together an architectural shot, color is important to consider. You either ignore it altogether and treat it as a distraction and shoot everything in black and white, which is one approach, or you embrace color and you use it because you know that people will respond differently to a color image to how they respond to a black and white image. All right, but they're all tools. It's a tool you've got when you're choosing. So one of the things you're going to choose is, am I going to shoot this thing in color or am I going to shoot in black and white? What's going to look the best? And you might actually try both. All right, and then you can put the two side by side and see which one tells the story the best. Do I need the color to tell the story? Don't I need the color? Traditionally, a lot of architectural photography has been black and white because they're more interested in shape, in space, in things that don't need color to tell the story. And what they do is they strip the color out of it so that you're concentrated on those things about form, shape, and the things that don't need the color as part of the image. So that's part of the assessment you go through in the subject you're going to take. You then think about, do I need color to tell the story? All right, if I'm taking pictures of vivid, I need the color. All right, because that's part of the story. A black and white picture of a night with vivid lights going on is that's not the story. You need the color. So it all comes down to what the story is and what you need to tell the story. So these are another three of mine, but they what's interesting about the three of them is that they got very similar colorways. All right, so they got that steely blue, and then they've got a bit of a hint of the gold. But they are three architectural images looking at different things and telling different stories. All right, so we got the one on the bottom left, that is a shot during vivid with some of the lights just picking up the harbour bridge. But when you get out there with your, on the walkway of the harbour bridge deck with your 70 to 200, you can pull it right in and get some really interesting abstracts. So as a picture that tells me something about the harbour bridge, maybe not. As an interesting graphic exercise with lots of things going on and an interesting shot, yeah, maybe. But they've got different purposes. Or if I produced a book on the harbour bridge and I wanted to understand about gusset plates and the number of rivets that were used, then this can form part of the portfolio to tell the story of the harbour bridge. But so you've got to think about whether the images stand on their own or whether they've got to work with other images to actually tell the story. The one on the top right is kind of nice because it what it does is it takes something quite known and makes it a bit more interesting. All right, because I've got the reflection in the building and because not many people stand on the balcony at level 9 of number 1 Macquarie Street, you end up, it's like a drone shot because you don't usually get to see it. So being there and getting that shot, it's got a wow factor because it's interesting. All right, it's not a usual shot that you see. The one down the bottom right is a 600mm lens shot from the wharf at Taronga Zoo and just capturing that morning light on the building. So the thing that gives the interest to that shot is what the light's doing on the glass in the buildings. All right, the sky helps that, but it's a dropped-in sky. All right, so it's a perfectly blue sky and it does nothing for the building. So I needed to do something that emphasized the glass in the buildings. And by taking out the blue sky, it gave the interest to the buildings. So I make no apologies for dropping skies in if they serve a purpose. So in this instance, what it did was reduce the emphasis of the plain sky and puts it back into the buildings. And that was the story, just the reflection of that golden light on the glass in that morning light just after sunrise. Depends on the story. Yep.
Yeah, could I interrupt him? Could you go back to the previous one, the first one of yours that you showed, the one with the red?
Yep.
What am I looking at? What angle have you taken that from?
Okay, so I'm standing on the ground, and that is the underside of the office building level. And the office building level would have to start on about level 6. And this is an enormous, great concrete column that supports the podium of the building. All right, so that they've isolated the office building part from the bottom bit of the building. So the bottom of the bit of the building addresses the street, and then they've put the office building up on the top, and to emphasize the scale, they've put this great crisscross column on the end to support the office building. So you're actually looking at the underside of the building.
Did you say that you didn't say you flipped it to make it double what it was?
I did. So the right-hand side of the picture is what you see. And the left-hand side of the picture, there's another building behind it. All right. So if I wanted to isolate the subject, so there again, it's a story, you know, as a photographer, you want to isolate the subject to concentrate the interest on your subject. So in this instance, I wanted to get rid of the noise and the fuss of the other buildings that were in the background. So I've taken a nice clean sky and flipped it onto the other side so that the building stands in isolation. So as I'm looking at it, I'm not distracted by those elements in the background.
What's the address of this building?
Let me look it up. I think it's number 1 George. I think it's got a big O-N-E on it. Anybody else know the building?
Timmy, are you viewing that looking vertically upwards, are you?
Yeah, straight up.
Did you lay down on the pavement?
No, you can quite happily stand there, because that the width of the column at the base would have to be 20 meters, 15, 20 meters.
Oh, yeah.
Right? It's huge. All right. So scale-wise, it's absolutely enormous. Let me just Google on the other screen here.
And you didn't enhance the colour or anything, that was that colour?
Of course I did. Why wouldn't you?
So was it orange at all?
So it is. So they've used a timber veneer, but so this is the thing. So if you look at if we go back, if I can go back, how do I go back? Oh, we're going the wrong way. Just go back up. Please. We'll go. So all of these have had their color enhanced. All right, none of them look like that. All right, because one of the things a photographer's also got to get their mind around when they start using cameras is that cameras are pretty crap at capturing what you see. All right, so if I look at something, the camera is never going to see the thing the same that I look at it. I've got a lens selection. I don't see the same way that the lens sees. When I look at out of the distance, I don't know if you've ever analysed it yourself, but when you look out to the distance, it's as if you've got bionic zoom. All right, so the distance looks like you're looking through a 70 to 200 lens. The mid-ground looks like you're looking through a 24 to 70. And when you're looking in the foreground, you've got all this peripheral vision. It's like you're looking through a 12mm lens. All right, so when you look visually, just out of your own eyes, you're looking through a multiple series of lenses, and everything you look at's in focus. I look at my thumbs in focus. I look at the mountains, they're in focus. Everything's in focus from back to front. And when I look in the shadows, I've got all the detail. When I look at the brights, my eyes adjust and I see all the brights. So your eye is this magnificent organ that has fantastic dynamic range, fantastic focal length, and dehazes everything. All right. So you take a photo of anything and it's never going to look like what you've seen. So to say that I want a picture straight out of camera is delusional, because you'll never get out of the camera what you see. You'll get a abstraction of what you see, because that's what the camera sees, but you'll never get what you see. So you've always got to do some work on it. So the intensity of color that you see, you will never get out of a camera. So that's why, in some ways, you've got to overemphasize the color in the image to get it back to more like what you actually perceive when you're looking at things. Right? And that is something that that if it's got to be straight out of camera, you're in denial, because there is no way that the camera, and you can spend your whole life trying to master the technicalities of capturing it straight out of camera, but why bother? All right, because you're up against a rock and a hard place. You might as well give up early and just enjoy your photography and manipulate as much as you can to try to make them look like what you see. Because I like taking a picture of what I see. All right, so that's what I do with my camera. It's a tool. All right, so it's not an end in itself. I'm not driven by the process of actually taking the shot and the process of having to adjust the settings and do the rest of it. It's a tool. So I've got a vision. I've got an image I want to create. I've got a tool that's good at collecting detail. So what I'll do is I'll use it to collect the detail, and then I'll manipulate the detail it collects to put together the work of art that I want to produce. So that's how I treat a camera. It's a tool.
So
just like a paintbrush, it's a paintbrush.
if we were to go to 1 George Street, would we see anything like what's in your image or not?
You would see the right-hand side. All right, quite clearly. The yellow will not be as yellow, but you got to look at the intent. All right, so the intent is that I've put it in an AIPP competition, and the AIPP images, which you can see, are all manicured to within an inch of their life. So what I've done is I've taken, in some ways, this is an abstraction, isn't it? So I've taken a photo of reality, and I've abstracted reality. I've put a different sky in it. I've changed the colors. I've modified how the light falls on the subject, with the intent at the end of the day that I have an image which is like an artwork. It is not like a real picture of what I see walking down the street. All right. So the intent is different. If I was a photojournalist wanting to capture what it was like walking down the street past this building, this is not the image that you would use.
No,
But in this instance, the intent of the purpose is to create a fine art image, and I will do to the fine art image whatever makes it a good graphic image at the end of the day. I will change colors, I'll strengthen colors, I'll change how the light is in the image to get it balanced to become a independent standalone work of art, but I've used reality to get there.
there's 1 George Street down the circular quay end, or the opposite?
So it's opposite Grosvenor Place, sort of halfway between Grosvenor Place and the Regent Hotel on the other side of George Street.
Yep, thank you.
All right. And it's kind of an interesting building because it's got the actual facade itself is like a brown glass, and you can see through. It's like I've kept the glass quite separate to the facade, and it's quite an interesting building in its own. So lots of things to look at and consider.
Fascinating.
Right.
Thank you.
On to the next one.
Tim, do you use a polarizer to cut the glare?
Sometimes you want the glare. All right, it depends. All right, so if you want the, if I'm not sure, so this image down the bottom right, if I had a polarizer on that, I would probably have cut out a lot of the nice reflections on the glass. So in the instance where I want the reflections, I wouldn't. But if I want to look through, it just depends on the effect you're trying to get. And so as a blanket rule, I don't use a polarizer because I'm more interested in, because my eye doesn't have a polarizer. All right. So if I wear my sunglasses, my polarizing sunglasses, I see one thing. If I put them on my head, I see a different thing. So depending on what I want to see, depends on the tools I use to capture what I want to see. Yeah. So if I need a polarizer to get rid of glare, I'll use it. But in this instance, in the bottom right, that would have ruined the reflection. So I wouldn't have wanted to use it.
But I suppose as a juxtaposition of that, if, for instance, like in those images where you were talking about having motion blur for whatever reason, whether it's people or clouds, you might use an ND filter to have that effect if you're in very bright sunlight.
Yeah, and especially the one in the bottom left.
Yeah.
Right. So if I want that really dark sky, then I'm going to want to put on my polarizer and crank it up and turn it around so I've got this pitch black blue sky. All right. So you use it as a tool for what you want to achieve.
Yeah.
All right. So, but the other thing that the polarizer will do, it'll give you a couple of stops of ND on it, and you can extend your exposure just because you got the polarizer on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are we having fun?
Yeah, that's good fun.
All right. So the other thing you can do, which I've got, is an infrared camera. All right. So I've got a camera which they've taken the normal sense cover off, and they've replaced it with a infrared sensor. And depending on the infrared sensor you put, depends on what you want to collect. I've got they call it an 850 nanometer filter on it, which means it cuts out color and essentially just gives you a nice sharp black and white. And what it does, which is kind of fun, is it changes, there again, if you're looking for something a little bit different, it changes things around so that making things look a bit unusual. And most of the biggest thing it changes is foliage. All right, so if you've got nice dark green foliage, like on the right-hand picture of Chifley Square there, because the sun is falling on it and it's got a certain warmth about it, it then radiates a different wavelength. So the infrared image reads it as a white as opposed to a dark green. All right, so if I took that image in the bottom right-hand corner and I took it normally, I'd have dark green palm leaves against quite a dark background, have a totally different sort of effect of the image. And the same with the one on the top in the middle. I took that only a couple of days ago down at Darling Harbour. That's Mr. Packer's casino that he'd like to have there. And a bit like the polarizer, if you get the right angle with your infrared, it sends the sky black. And so if there's any cloud running across the sky is completely white because it's got warmth in it. The clouds are nice and white because it's got warmth in it. But the blue of the sky, because it's absorbing all the heat, just goes pitch black. So you get some fantastic effects out of the image. You get more of a sense of that down on the bottom left there, where that's down. I'm standing under Harry Seidler's building, looking across to the new one, and Chifley Square is over on the left there. So I'm sort of diagonally opposite Chifley Square, which is where I shot the one on the right. And the infrared just renders light differently. All right. And one of the interesting things, which is quite good with infrared, is that the light dictates the composition. All right. Because as you're moving your camera around, there's spots where the light is perfect for the infrared, and there's spots where it burns out, and there's spots where it has no effect. So one of the interesting things about shooting infrared is that it gets you to look at light in a different way. So it then informs your normal lighting. When you're taking normal shots, you then start looking for the light in a different way when you've tried infrared. And that's kind of the fun part too. You can produce some interesting images, but the actual process of producing the images informs you and makes you more sensitive to looking for light and looking what light does on a subject. So, but you get some interesting effects, as you can see. So,
Tim, is that an expensive thing to replace the sense of colour?
$400, yeah, $400 or $500. So I've depends on the camera you've got. That little point and shoot RX100. I've actually I started off with one of those. So just a little cheapy camera. You can get the sensor changed on one of those. So if you've got an old camera, if you're upgrading your camera, keep the old one. Don't trade it in, and you can just change the sensor on it and use one of your old cameras as an infrared camera and have a lot of fun. So
where do you go to get that done?
There is a company in Melbourne that's doing it now, but the two big companies in the States, one's called Kolari Vision, Kolari Vision, and the other one is Life Pixel, I think it is. Hang on.
You happen to know Peter Bliss from the DY Club?
I know Peter very well, and we've gone and shot infrared together on many occasions.
Infrared all the time.
Yeah, so Life Pixel is the other company. So the difference between Life Pixel and Kolari Vision is a bit like Ford and Holden, depending on they sort of leapfrog each other with different things that they offer. I did mine through Life Pixel, just because at the time they seemed to have an edge on Kolari Vision. So you can either put your camera in a box and send it to them, and they'll do the conversion and they'll ship it back. Or LifePixel now has the ability where you can buy a camera, and then they'll put they'll change the sensor on it and then ship it to you. So that way, if you just want to buy a camera with a conversion, then it's a reasonably economic way of doing it.
Thank you.
Tim, just while you're on this sort of related subject, I suppose, is that technique of using in the old film days for black and white was to use orange and yellow and red filters. Have you played around with that sort of stuff?
No, but what I was going to say with the infrared is that they've now got the ability where, you know, a lot of these lenses now, you can actually put the filter in the back of the lens as opposed to on the front. That seems to be the way that things are going. So you've got like a postage stamp type filter that you actually put in the back of the lens before you put it on the camera. And LifePixel have one where they do a conversion to the camera where you can then put different filters on the back of the lens to get different effects, right? Because if once I've converted my camera to 850 nanometers, all I can do is shoot black and white. All right. Whereas if you come down the grade, it comes down to about 590 nanometers, and you can turn these images into golds and blues and all sorts of weird and wonderful candy colors. Right. So you got the old fashioned one. You remember the old film where you used to, in infrared, you were able to shoot in red, white, and blue, and you'd have red foliage and all sorts of the old Kodak film. Mm-hmm. They now have a filter that will do that for you as well. All right. So you can have a broad spectrum conversion, then you put this filter on the inside, and then you can shoot your red, white, and blue images. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, so, I was just thinking more in terms of a normal camera sensor, just using those filters to, like if you want to darken skies and things
to
like
accentuate, that. Yeah, you could, but also in Photoshop these days, you can do if you go into the settings there, you can actually do a mask by color. All right. Yep. And so you can do a selection of a particular color, create a mask by that, and then you can lighten and darken by color. All right. Yeah. So you can get similar effects without having to go to the trouble of doing your filters.
Yep.
Yeah.
Tim, is there anything in Photoshop where you can change things to infrared?
Oh, you can get a very similar effect depending on how you take the shot. All right. So if you're going to do that, then you learn tricks. All right. So one of the tricks is if you shoot a subject on a perfectly blue sky, that gives you infinite ability to do something because you've isolated the blue sky from the background of the whole image. You don't have the problem of clouds. All right. So you can, if you've got a perfectly gradient blue sky as the background to your image, you can turn it black, you can turn it all sorts of things, and you can muck around with your image to get it looking like infrared.
Okay.
So it's just one of the tricks you learn as you're playing with it.
Yeah.
So for instance, the bottom left-hand one, it was a perfectly overcast day. All right. So there was no detail in the sky at all, and that's why it's white. So if I'd taken that shot on and that's why I went there that day, because it gave like the whole city was lit up like a light box under infrared because it's got this perfectly even glow coming down over all the buildings. And there was no problem about having a complicated cloud arrangement like we've got for the casino there. And it also rendered it in shades of grey. If I take the same shot on a perfectly clear day, the sky will be black and the buildings will be bright white jumping out of a black background. So totally different effect. But on this day, I went in there just because it was a light box day and I wanted this sort of effect where it was all the soft greys. So it's there again, it's like it's knowing your tools and knowing the effects that you'll get out of them and going in on the day when you're going to get the best effect. So you just don't turn up. So an image like that on the bottom left is a planned image. I've taken, 15 or 20 of those images under different conditions, and each one informs the next shot. And I'll just work away at an idea and fine tune it till I get it, somewhere where I like it.
So Tim, looking at the time, you want to keep moving on, I suppose.
Yep. So what have you got to sort of finish up? Tom?
Oh, there's no particular time. I just sort of didn't want to take up your whole evening. Or
All right. No, well, we're well and truly into it. There's probably only half a dozen slides left and we're done. But these are kind of some interesting ones. So this one, these are all infrared. And these were put together as a portfolio of 3 images. And I put these in the Australian Photography magazine and they came, I think, 3rd in the art category. All right. So they're well received by the judges. But a bit like I was saying before, where, well, the first thing you got to do with a portfolio, because the Australian Photography magazine runs portfolio competitions a bit, is the images have to talk to each other and they have to tell, so the 3 images together need to tell more than just each image on its own. And one of the mistakes a lot of people do in the portfolio submissions for the Australian Photography magazine is they don't think about that. So one of the things is that the images having the same size format helps, because then the judge doesn't have to swap and change between different formats that he's looking at. They got to have a similar style and they got to have a similar sort of feel, and then you're across the line, because that's the differences aren't a distraction, and then you can concentrate on the story. So in this case, the story of the left-hand image is how impersonal a curtain wall facade in a city can be, and how out of place a person is on that facade in that building. The second one is like a canyon shot, a slot canyon shot, where you've just got a canyon in the city, just with this beam of light coming down to pick up the person in the canyon. And the third one is a play on skyscraper. All right, so the building is a skyscraper so high that it could pierce the clouds. All right, so the metaphor there is the building is a needle piercing the cotton wool of the sky, right, the cloud of the sky. So the 3 of them together tell the story of the city, or tell a story of the city. An impersonal facade, a slot canyon, and piercing the sky as a skyscraper, right? So all together, so as an architectural image, they now have a story. They've got another level of interaction that you can have with somebody. So not just a plain picture of a building, but they've actually now creating a bit of a story. And then that takes it to the next level, where you're then engaging the person who's looking at your images in a different way to just a straight design type shot, like the AIPP ones, which are standalone graphics, right? Different purpose, different intent, different outcome. And these are another way of telling a story, and in a single shot. All right, so the one on the right is Palladio's church on the Redentore on Giudecca at Venice, and the story there is Aqua Alta. All right, when they get their high tides, the buildings fill up with water, and so I've actually used a software package called Flood, and I've taken my picture of Palladio's building and I've flooded it. All right, so it now tells the story of Aqua Alta for me in a Palladian architectural image. The one on the left is an old castle on near Evian in Switzerland on Lake Geneva, and it's just around the corner from where the Freddie Mercury statue is. So it's probably only about a 15-minute drive from Freddie. But this one, I had to wait for an hour for that ferry to turn up. All right, but the reason I did that is that the image of the castle on its own is one thing, but to have the interest of the ferry informing the overall story, it gives more of a story and interest to the image by having that as an extra element. All right, it just takes it to a different dimension. So rather than just so there again, these are just alternatives to the simple abstract graphic presentation of a building, in that you can then have a picture of a building that you can then bring something else to, rather than just purely what you see. The other thing to think about is when we ever next get to travel again in a couple of years' time, is to turn your travel photography into architectural photography, because there's lots of places around the world that you can go. And if you learn a few, tricks on architectural photography before you go, and if you do your homework on the subjects of what you're going to see, you go through all the Instagram shots of the place you're going to see, and you get a feel for it before you get there. And then you want to put your own spin on it. You want to see it in your own way and see it with fresh eyes. Then having done all your homework, then you've got a good chance of being able to do that. So what do we got? The Pantheon up in the top right in Rome. We've got some basils in the middle there in Moscow. We've got Mr. Gaudi's church up in the top left in Sagrada Familia. So all the sorts of things you can have fun with as you travel. And then rather than just having your travel snaps, you then got a catalogue of architectural photos, which you could then group together. So if you wanted to, if you're in the habit of producing little photo books when you're going on your trips, you could do yourself a little photo book of architectural type shots and capture and see the world in a slightly different way, but put your own spin on it. And so we're up to the sort of second last slide. That one was quick twice. Let me go back because the other one had some interest in it. So I think up the page was a bit of a delay in the click. All right, so this shot on the right is one of mine. It's homage to Max Dupain. Oh, flicked off again. Hang on, sorry. Technical issues. Right, so Max Dupain. It's kind of interesting with Australian architectural photography because often there was a partnership between an architect and a photographer. All right, so the photographer, after a while, got what the architect was trying to capture, or the architect was happy with the photographs that the photographer was taking. So you end up certain people working together. So at the bottom, that last link I've got, when you get a chance to look at that one, that's an article written in 2004 in the Architecture Australia magazine, and it looks at some of those combinations. There's about three famous architects and three prominent architectural photographers who end up working together quite a bit. And in this instance, on the picture on the right, it was Max Dupain and Harry Seidler. So Max Dupain took this keyhole shot, which became quite an iconic shot of Australia Square. But his is in black and white, mine's in colour. So there again, you can choose to have a look at the black and white one and see if the black and white one is better because there's less distraction with no colour. So, but so it's also part of that heritage thing where you're looking at life on other people's shoulders. So just like architects, their work develops and you can, their ideas develop. It's kind of interesting to look at what people have done before and have a go at interpreting it in your own way. So the three people there, Harold Casno, he was around and he's the grandfather of Australian landscape photography. You need to have a look at Harold Casno if you've never looked at it. So Harold, I think his first big job was documenting the rocks area for what was then the Rocks Authority, because they wanted to look at just the slums and what they needed to do to them to make them healthier places. So they actually documented all the rocks area around Circular Quay. And apart from that, Harold also took some fantastic shots of the bridge under construction, and also of the old boats that used to come into Circular Quay and the like. And apart from landscape photography, he's got some fantastic architectural type shots. Max Dupain is kind of the godfather of Australian architectural photography. And John Gollings is the current godfather. So he's been working for about 40 years now, I think. John, he had an exhibition in the city during lockdown at the Australian Museum. What's the one on the corner of Phillip Street there? I think it's the Australian Museum. And they had an exhibition of his work there, his architectural photography work. So John's still working as an architectural photographer, but what he hasn't photographed isn't worth photographing, and he's worth looking up. So the first little cross-reference there for Capture Magazine, as I say, you'll get all these because I'll provide the PDF if you don't want to write it down, is they've got a good little article on architectural photography in its current state. and the changing nature of architectural photography, where they're looking at where video now plays quite an important role in describing a building in a way that a still photograph can't, and where multimedia is now being used more for conveying the essence or nature of a building. So rather than a still photograph, different ways and different tools they're using. The second one, Wallpaper. Wallpaper magazine's a design magazine, and it's kind of good if you want to just keep up with some architectural photography, because it usually has a section in that each magazine. But it's got the Sony World Photography Awards 2021 in it. So that link is there, where you can have a look at some current architectural photography and the state-of-the-art stuff that's happening around the world. And that's it. So if you want to see a few more of my shots, you can go to, I've got a website, and there's a portfolio section there, and you can look up different portfolios and see different sorts of things. So I've got architectural shots, I've got landscape shots, I've got all sorts of things there. And I've got a Instagram page there too. And I've got a number of different accounts. There's one that just does architectural photography, and you can have a look at some of the shots there on Instagram.
Can I just ask, that photo on the screen, is that one of yours?
Yeah, so that one, that got to semi-finals in the AIPP Silver Lining Awards, and it got knocked out, and the other one continued on. So get this, all right? So when you enter the AIPP, they give you feedback, right? Judges' feedback, all right? So that's a straight out of camera shot, which I've mucked around with the colours a bit. But the feedback from the judge was, it was a brave decision to leave the cranes in the reflection, and that if it was his shot, he would have tidied up and got rid of the cranes, so it was more of a graphic image rather than harking back to the reality that the cranes brought to the picture. So, as I say, the lesson there is that there's different intents for different images. It would seem with the AIPP architectural ones that they're more about graphic design and fine crafted artworks, as opposed to trying to explore a space or a character of a place. It's a different way of addressing it, as is the one of the shot in Mumbai with the fellow on the water. All architectural photographs, all different intent. And as with all our photography, we have to decide if we want a story or we don't want a story, or what our images are about. And if they float your boat, then they are a legitimate image. But people's boats get floated by different things. So people will choose different things. They're all, one's not better than the other, they're just different.
And where those reflections are, is that glass or metal?
It's polished stainless steel.
Is that close to Australia Square? Like,
yes, so if you go to the building in the background behind the polished metal is Grosvenor Place. And the building on the left that's hanging over, that is number 1 George Street, which is the bottom that I took in the other photo.
yeah.
All right?
Well, that's a thanks, Tim. That was a very, very illuminating presentation, and certainly it expanded my mind about architectural photography. So,
but it was also, what I was trying to do is also expand ideas on photography in general.
yes,
Because often we get quite pigeonholed in what we're doing, and one of the big leaps for me was to come to the decision that the camera was only a tool in the process, rather than being driven by the camera and my lens selection and everything else. I turned it on its head and said, well, these are the sorts of images I want to create. How do I get my camera to do it? So I just use the camera in some ways just as collecting the information, which I then use and assemble the way that I want to assemble it, rather than being driven by what the camera is going to give me. So yes. I've tried to free myself from the
tyranny,
the tyranny of the camera. And it's a quite a liberating way of looking at your photography then, because then instead of grappling with what if stop, what lens, what this, what that, then once you get to know all of that, then you're out there just trying to create an image, and how's the best way to create it. And as I say, the camera's just a tool, and you manipulate it. And well, you do anyway. Your whole life is spent tricking the camera, isn't it?
Yes. Yes.
You know, you're tricking it's the take on what light level it is. You're tricking it on where it's focusing, because you're going to, you know, press it, get the focus, move it so it's got the same focal point. You know, so your whole life is spent tricking it.
Yeah.
So rather than being it in the driving seat, you turn it on its head and you tell it what you want.
Yes. Exactly.
I can
I have
see
a
that we're all
question.
going to, yeah, I was going to say, I can see that we're all going to be meeting with Elaine Hartman down at number 1 George Street.
Let me know when it's on, because I'm happy to meet you down there and walk you around.
Oh, well, that's very kind of you.
Yeah, might take you up on that.
No problem.
Yeah. So, any other quick questions before we?
Yeah, I have a quick question. I was just wondering, did you get any shots of the pink moon when it was out with your architecture a couple of weeks ago?
No. There was a fantastic, I'm not sure if you saw the meme on Facebook, there's a fantastic one where this guy was sitting back and he said exactly that. I'm not going to take any pictures of the pink moon, because in about 3 hours time, my screen will be full of them. So in some ways, it also is an approach I've got to my landscape photography, is if I turn up to a place, I don't want to take the same picture that Ken Duncan's taken. I don't want to take the same picture that Ignazio Palazzio's taken. I want to take my picture.
Yeah.
Because if I was happy with their picture, I just buy it. All right. And I've actually done that with one of Ignazio's. I've bought his picture of the spa pools up in the Kimberley, because I reckon it's a great picture and I don't need to take one of those myself.
Yeah.
Right? So it's the same with the moon. All right. There's some fantastic shots. The guys have done the phasing, they've done the colors in and out, they've done all of that. And, you know, unless it's not something that particularly tweaked my boat, because someone else is going to do it better. So, and if I wanted a picture of the moon like that, I'd just buy one of their pictures.
Tim, can you recommend a time to go to 1 George Street? What time?
Well, it depends what you want to take, but you can see in the picture that's on the screen at the moment that is, so this shot was taken after the picture of the Opera House. So it was on that nice still morning, beautiful clear sky. We'd waited to see the sun rise over the Opera House, and then we went for a street walk. So this would have been on a Monday of a long weekend, which was fantastic. Absolutely no one in the city. So if you're thinking about doing it, this coming Monday might be a good time to disappear in there, because an empty city is fantastic. But it was just after sunrise, so it's got to be 7:30, 8 o'clock, something like that. And then you can see the first thing in the morning, you get that lovely quality of light. You get that lovely pinkness in the light. You get the warmth in the light. You got a softness to the light. And an hour later, it's becoming harsh, and you just don't have the soft shadows. All right, so you choose the time of day where you're going to get that nice soft light if you want the shadows soft. And you can't do this in the afternoon, because the sun's right around the other side of the city and everything's in shadow. So first thing in the morning, and you can see what's happening on number 1 George in this picture. The light's hitting the side of Grosvenor building, and it's getting reflected in all the glass on the opposite side, on the other side of the street. So to get that, you've got to be down there, straight after sunrise, and have that really soft light and that lovely reflection, because also that lovely gradient you get on the building on the left there, you get that just in that soft early morning light.
There's no security that time of morning, is there?
There's not. No. So that's the other thing. Is that? But they're all. This is a handheld shot, and there again, this is with my 12mm Laowa. All right. So the 12mm is absolutely fantastic for getting into tight spots and being able to compose lots of interesting things in tight spots. So if I was ever to recommend a lens, the 12mm Laowa, which I think is only about $1,500, $1,700, something like that. It's not an expensive lens. And as a landscape lens or an interior lens or this sort of shot, absolutely fantastic, because you can keep it on infinity, because everything over a meter is in focus. Right? So, so as an astro lens, fantastic. So for the old eyes, which don't work too well in the dark, you don't have to muck around to find what focus is. You just put it on infinity, it's done. And then if you keep it horizontal or level with the horizon, everything's plumb for an architectural photo. So talk about it's a really, if you wanted to get a lens, it sort of does everything for a bang for your buck. The little lower 12mm is fantastic. The comes for all the settings and or all the adapters. So they make a Nikon one, a Canon one, a Sony one. So it comes in all the right. You don't have to use an adapter. Got a native lens adapter. Yep.
But definitely on a tripod.
This one was handheld.
Oh wow!
Because of the angle, this was held at about above my head, just to get the right angle. And so the other thing I tend to do is that I divorce myself from looking through the viewfinder and only use the display on the screen, because then what you can do is, as you're purely looking at the screen, you can compose in the screen and just be seeing what the camera sees. All right. So you're not trying to get the camera to see what you're seeing. You've given up on that, and you just look at what the lens is actually seeing, and you compose in the viewfinder, in the LED screen. All right. And that way, because you've divorced yourself from looking through the viewfinder, it becomes an abstract exercise, because all you're interested is in the shapes and the composition that you're seeing on the screen. And it's a great way to compose, because you've taken off all the presumptions that you have on the shot, and you're purely just taking what you're seeing. So it's a great way to sort of get into that creative space, to purely be composing with what you're seeing on the screen. So good way of doing it.
Yeah.
And what's the aperture of that 19mm lens?
Of the 12mm?
Yeah, 12mm.
Yeah, it goes down to 2.8.
2.8, okay.
Yeah.
And
So
at 2.8, it gives you that everything up from a metre, you say?
Yes. Yep.
Wow.
So have I got it handy? I haven't got it handy. No. But yeah, so it's quite amazing.
Wow.
I use it a lot in for my landscape shots, because that old adage of, foreground, midground, background, you can actually tilt the camera down at the ground and fill it full of foreground, and kind of look through the image to the landscape, and it's all in focus.
Wow.
It's quite extraordinary.
Yeah. Even at 2.8.
Even at 2.8.
Wow. Yeah. It's amazing.
Yeah.
All right. Any more questions?
I was just going to raise with you, Tim, some of the very interesting architectural buildings that you've no doubt played around with, the UTS buildings up the other end of George Street, up towards Sydney Uni.
Yep.
And some of the weird designs they've got there, some
Yep.
fascinating ones. Some of them are very difficult to photograph. You just can't get in the right spot.
Precisely. So that one, which has got the sort of curvy metal screen on it with the holes in it,
Yeah.
that's a great one to try and get at dusk, because you get that sense of the light coming through the holes. So there again, it's kind of visiting at different times of the day and just trying to see what you're going to do. So there again, if you can get there on a long weekend sunrise, you can probably stand in the middle of Parramatta Road and take the shot.
Right. Right.
You just go with 2 or 3 other people, and they run traffic interference for you.
Yeah. I like that.
Yes. All right. Well, I think we probably should wrap it up, everybody, unless somebody's got a question they can't leave.
What you might do for me, Vic, is maybe send me the Dropbox link, and then I'll upload the PDF to it.
Yeah, or you can just send the PDF to me and I can do that.
The only thing will be size. It's
okay. Yep. Understood. All right.
I'll need to do a Dropbox upload. Yep.
Okay. I'll create the folder for it and I'll send you the link.
Yep.
We'll look forward to receiving that.
Yeah.
Very
interesting.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Hope I've inspired you all.
Do you want to?
Very much so.
Yes.
I'm sure. Yep.
Thank you.
Just, yep, that's right. So we've got the wall again. So yeah, well, thanks very much, Tim. So look forward to trying to practice some of your suggestions and be inspired by them. I'm sure. So
Yeah.
it was a great presentation. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Play the pictures off and look at the options.
Thanks very much.
There
Made us more interested in architecture.
you go.